really nice thing. So I will introduce Abby Seaman. She's our next speaker. She is the vegetable IPM coordinator for New York State Integrated Pest Management. And she's going to talk on IPM and organic and what do they mean for home gardeners. Abby, you have your, I can see your talk. It's in, it's not in slideshow though.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
I don't know why it wouldn't be in slideshow. Let me see. I might have to stop sharing unless somebody can give me instructions.
Sometimes it, oops, well, we'll try it again.
I'll try it again.
Oh, thank you, Alejandro, for putting the spotted lanternfly map in the chat. There you go.
Is that good?
That's good.
Awesome. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I think I'm going to just turn my video off for now. Whoops. Let me go back. Well, never mind. My job this morning is to talk to you about integrated pest management and organic approaches to pest management and what they might have to do, what they might have in common and what might be different about them. So I wanted to start with a couple of questions for you to kind of find out what people know and what people think already about IPM and organic approaches to pest management. So I guess Gemma or Kim are in charge of sharing, of putting up the polling questions. There we go. So I'm just wondering, I know that you just had an introduction to integrated pest management, but I'm kind of wondering what your level of knowledge coming into this presentation is about integrated pest management and how similar you think IPM and organic pest management are. I'll give you a couple seconds or a couple minutes to get some responses.
Seems to be working because I can see the numbers
I
going
can
up.
see the
So
numbers
thank you,
coming
everyone.
up, yes. So I see that people have are rating themselves at kind of medium for their knowledge of integrated pest management. So I guess me reinforcing what you've already heard this morning wouldn't be a bad thing. And so some people think that IPM and organic pest management approaches are similar or somewhat similar, and only a few of you think that they're not similar. So that's interesting. All right, so I guess I don't see any more responses coming in, so I guess we can end the poll. Can I do that? Okay. Yeah, so medium knowledge of IPM, and people think that IPM and organic approaches to pest management are similar or somewhat similar. All right, so can we make the poll go, let's see. Oh yeah, there it goes. I made it go away for me. So here's what we're going to talk about this morning in the next 20 minutes or so. I'm going to go over, kind of reinforce what practices are used in IPM and what practices are used in organic approaches to pest management. And just at the end, kind of summarize the similarities and differences from my perspective. I'm just going to go through a couple of quick definitions, and these are just my off-the-cuff definitions because I went through and looked for some official definitions and just really didn't like them. So for me, integrated pest management is an approach to managing pests that emphasizes prevention strategies to minimize pests from the beginning. And also important are pest detection, identification, and forecasting. And the goal is to minimize risks from both pests and pest controls. And organic is kind of a more broad concept. It's a total crop production approach that emphasizes soil health and optimizing natural systems. And the term organic is actually regulated by the USDA for commercial agricultural production. So the definitions that I'll show you about organic are coming right from the USDA regulations. And I guess a primary factor about organic is that synthetic fertilizers and pesticides are just prohibited in organic production, which is one primary difference from between IPM and organic. So if you're gardening already, you're probably already doing some IPM. So you're going to probably recognize some of the things that I'm going to go over quickly. And this is just a photo of a garden with some IPM approaches in effect. I see some row covers. I see a little high tunnel right here. And I see some plants that are being trellised. So I'm just going to right now go through some steps in IPM. And one of the primary steps for commercial farmers is crop rotation, which is unfortunately a hard thing to do in a gardening situation. But a lot of diseases, especially in some insects, actually overwinter, spend the winter in the soil in or around where you planted a crop the previous year. So the further away or the further distance in time you can plant that same crop in that same location, the more effective rotation will be in helping prevent insects, diseases, and weeds, making them sad and you, the gardener, happier. Another step in IPM is sanitation, and this is more practical in a gardening situation. So you want to start with seed that's free of any kinds of diseases that are carried in the seed. You want to start with pest-free transplants. So if you're growing your own, the seed issue comes into play. But if you're buying transplants from a nursery, for example, you want to inspect them to be sure that they're not bringing in any kinds of diseases into your garden. Cleaning up crop residue at the end of the season is absolutely essential. And one of the things that I, as a gardener, are often negligent in. And this is a picture of a tomato that's infected with a fungal disease called anthracnose. And you can see the symptoms of the disease here. And what happens, these fungal diseases are very crafty, and they create structures that if the disease part of the plant it decomposes in the soil, those structures can maintain throughout the winter. And that's what gets the disease started the next year. So if you can get those diseased either fruits or leaves out of the garden at the end of the season, you're going to increase your chances of not having that disease the following year. Another place that plant diseases can get through the winter is on stakes, especially bacterial diseases, if you're staking your tomatoes, for example, or on landscape fabric, which is a way that I managed to get some pretty nasty looking diseases of my summer squash going several years ago. And I finally realized that I needed to replace my landscape fabric to get rid of the diseases that were getting carried over on that. Another very important step in integrated pest management is to use pest-resistant varieties. And there are a lot of, especially disease-resistant varieties that you can choose. And if you look in the seed catalog, they'll often state what diseases that particular variety is resistant to. So for example, in cucurbits, downy mildew is a disease that will really like kind of mid to late season start to take out your cucumbers. And this is just a photo of, on the left, we have a disease, a downy mildew resistant variety compared with the same garden with a downy mildew susceptible variety. So you can get a lot of disease control by planting a disease resistant variety. Another important step in IPM is to make sure your plants are as healthy as possible, and by optimizing your fertility and optimizing the pH of your soil. So if too much fertility can help promote some diseases, and they can interfere with fruiting and quality, especially in something like tomatoes. It can be especially for commercial farmers, can cause some nutrients to go into the groundwater. And too much fertility can also make your weeds do better and give you more weed problems. Too little fertility can cause your plants to be weak and stressed, more susceptible to diseases and insects, and not having enough water can also cause stress issues in your plants. So I'm just going to switch over to looking at organic pest management regulations and see what we can, what sounds familiar in these regulations. And these came right out of the regulations that the National Organic Program, the USDA National Organic Program, uses to regulate certified organic farmers. So in this organic pest management regulation, it says the producer must use management practices to prevent crop pests, weeds, and diseases, including but not limited to crop rotation, soil and crop nutrient management practices, sanitation, cultural practices that enhance soil crop health, and planting varieties that are resistant to weeds, pests, to insects, weeds, and diseases. So that sounds pretty familiar to me to what the IPM practices that I just outlined. So just some more, switching back to IPM, some more steps in IPM is to optimize the environment. And when we're talking about optimizing the environment, we're talking about the opposite of optimizing the environment for our pests. So we want to optimize the environment for our crops, while what's the opposite of optimizing? De-optimizing the environment for our pests. So just a couple of examples of that. This is a photo of a high tunnel, which is a high tunnel size that a commercial grower would use, but high tunnels are entirely possible in a gardening situation. So what high tunnels do are help keep plant leaves dry, and wet leaves and high humidity really favor a lot of plant diseases. So if we can keep our leaves and plants drier, that will minimize our plant diseases. Another practice that's in place here is staking, that also helps keep our leaves dry and keeps our plants off the ground and have less contact with any pathogens that overwintered in the soil. And another practice here that we can see here is mulching. In this case, it's plastic mulching, but you could also think of organic mulches like straw doing the same thing to help keep soil and water from splashing up on the leaves and carrying pathogen inoculum and getting diseases started. Another way to optimize the environment is, and also a way to keep leaves dry, is to use trickle irrigation rather than overhead irrigation to supply water. And also keep your water situation optimal for your plants and help keep your plants as healthy as possible. And so going back to our organic pest management regulations, it states in a very regulatory fashion that disease problems may be controlled through management practices that suppress the spread of disease organisms, or the application of non-synthetic biological, botanical, or mineral inputs. And I think they're referring to, again, optimizing plant health through proper fertility, but also possibly using pesticides that would be allowed for organic production. So going back to steps in IPM, correct pest ID is very important. You want to ask yourself, is what I'm seeing even a pest? For example, this blossom end rot picture here is a physiological disorder that could be mistaken for a pest. It's important to understand the life history of the pests that you might see, and that's something that you would need to think about learning over time as you get more gardening experience. So for example, this is a bacterial disease of tomato. This is a fungal disease of tomato, early blight. And this is another fungal disease of tomato called gray mold. So you know, on the same crop, you can have multiple different diseases that you would have different approaches to managing in the future. And when you're monitoring your crops, you want to be able to understand what your diseases are, be able to recognize them, and understand what your best management option for each particular disease would be. Another step in IPM is keeping track of your plants and looking at them regularly, not letting something get started and kind of get out of control before you have a chance to identify it and take some management options. So it's important to detect your problems early. It's important to know when you have enough of a particular problem that it's time to maybe do something about it. And then another aspect of monitoring is if you do take some action to control a pest, you want to keep track of whether that action was effective for your future, your future planning and your future gardens. If that didn't work, maybe you need to try a different strategy for that particular problem the next time. Another step in IPM is to recognize and foster and protect the good organisms that you'll find in your garden. And so one thing that you want to be able to recognize is beneficial insects. For example, this ladybug here, and provide them with the kind of food and shelter that they need to thrive and help you manage your pests in your garden. So for example, a lot of beneficial insects will feed on pollen and nectar, and that will help them stay in your garden. It will help attract them to your garden and stay in your garden while waiting for some pests to show up that they could eat. So it's important to keep to have some flower. It's both beautiful and important to have a constant supply of different sizes and shapes of flowers in your garden. And it's also important to become familiar with what the beneficial insects look like and be able to distinguish them from the pest insects. So if you find an insect in your garden, you might want to pick it off if it was a pest, but you certainly wouldn't want to do that if it was a beneficial. So it's important to understand what they look like. So back to the organic pest management regulations. Insect problems may be, the regulations state, insect problems may be controlled through mechanical or physical methods, including but not limited to augmentation or introduction of predators or parasites of the pest species, development of habitat for natural enemies of pests, or non-synthetic controls such as lures, traps, or repellents. So again, very similar to the IPM practices that we've outlined this morning. Another step in IPM is a concept called thresholds, or when you have enough of a pest to intervene. So how many is too many? When is some kind of action warranted? And what do I need to do to avoid unnecessary crop losses? And we're looking at two pests of crucifers here, diamondback moth and flea beetles, that are very common and will be pests that you find in your garden. So some steps in IPM that we could think about as interventions would be apply a barrier like this row cover that is something that you could use for that flea beetle pest that we just saw. Early harvesting to just get rid, if you could just get that crop in and eat it instead of letting the pests eat it, that might be a way to intervene. In a garden situation, hand picking is a very feasible approach. Releasing beneficial insects that you would purchase is another approach that you might think about. And applying a pesticide would also be an approach that we would think about in an IPM situation. And an example of that would be a biological pesticide called Bacillus thuringiensis that you could buy at a garden store. So looking back at our pest management regulations, this is what the regulations for certified organic farmers say about what farmers need to do before they can use any of the pesticides that are allowed for organic production. It says, if the practices that I talked about in the previous regulations that I showed you are not sufficient to prevent or control a pest, a biological or botanical substance included in the national list of allowed substances may be used to prevent suppress or control pests. But provided that the farmer has outlined what they've done to prevent the pests, all the practices that they've used have to be in place before organic farmers are allowed to use a pesticide. So I would say that organic farmers are, or in an organic situation, or especially farmers, are required to use integrated pest management practices. So just to summarize the different practices that we've gone through, crop rotation definitely allowed in both or practice in both organic and IPM situations, resistant varieties in both, optimizing the environment are definitely mentioned in both. Optimum fertility, again, mentioned in both the IPM practices and the organic regulations. The difference being that synthetic fertilizers are prohibited in organic, but they are allowed in IPM. Again, correct pest ID would be practiced in both situations. Thresholds or deciding when you have enough of a pest to take action would again be allowed in both practice in both situations. And then pesticides, the difference would be for organic, in organic situations, they're allowed only if prevention practices are in place, and then so any synthetic pesticides would be prohibited in an organic production situation. So that's my summary of the differences and similarities between organic and IPM practices. And I have one more question for you to finish up. If Gemma could share that. There we go. Thanks, Gemma. So same question that I asked you at the beginning, just to see if I've changed your mind at all on whether you think that organic and IPM pest management practices are similar. It may be
Great timing, Abby. We have time if we can look at the questions in the chat.
Okay, I
Steve-
can't see the chat, so if somebody.
I will read them to you. How about
Okay,
that?
Steve answered a couple, and we have about 5 minutes for that before we switch to our next chat.
So one of them is what's the best method of cleaning stakes and landscape fabrics and also metal cages? Steve did put an article in from Connecticut on some of the cleaning, but landscape fabric, I would think it might be one that's tough.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know. I would think that even just hosing it off at the end of the season would be good, because I wasn't even doing that in my garden. I hate to admit it, but it's true. But I would say that even a 10% Clorox solution is what is recommended. And there are some other commercially available sanitizing agents, but I'm not sure that in a gardening situation that would work. So
Yeah,
I guess I would say
Clorox.
that 10% Clorox would be, especially for stakes and metal cages.
Yep, and that is even considered a pesticide. So a new one is, any suggestions for crop rotation for a community garden, because everyone pretty much grows the same things. That
is a difficult situation for sure. And no, I don't. I don't have that. I don't have a good recommendation for that, except if everybody would get together and agree not to grow something for a year. And I know that's not going to happen. So yes, that is a very difficult situation. And that's where sanitation might become the more important practice.
Great, thank you. And we did have a question on whether using pesticide treated seeds is considered organic, and Steve said no. There are some situations. Is there a situation where if you can't get organic seed, is it allowed if you're certified organic?
So this is, again, I'm talking from a certified organic farming situation. There are some microbial pesticides that are allowed for organic production, and there are seed treatment formulations that are also allowed in an organic situation. So, but they're not widely available. And organic farmers can use untreated seed if they're not able to get organic seed of the variety that they need. Sorry, I'll turn my.
We have one again on the community garden. Do you think flipping crops from one side of a bed to another is enough?
One side of a bed. Well, so I think that a raised bed situation, or kind of yes, using beds rather than thinking about using the whole garden is one way to think about rotating, because you can rotate to at least the other side of your garden. That would be a way to think about rotation. I actually have two separate small gardens, so that's one way that I think about rotating. I have two different growing spots. And so I try not to grow, especially my tomatoes, in the same garden for more than a couple of years.
So she said 4x10 raised beds, but one of the other pieces is just to know what was put there the year before, and sometimes
Yeah.
just keeping some records on
Yes.
what was done, so that you don't inadvertently keep putting something in the same
Well,
place.
that's one of the IPM practices that I neglected to mention, which is record keeping. So yeah, that would be a great idea to keep track of what you grew when, which year, because I don't know about you, but I can't remember anymore.
I can't remember anything. And then Steve answered this question also, but what about leaving the roots? Just remove the above ground parts of the plants at the end of the growing season, but leaving the roots in the soil over winter. Depends what they
Well,
are.
there are diseases that attack roots that might attack plants in one family more than the others. So I would get all of the plant out of there.
As much as possible, yeah.
As
And
much as
then the
possible.
late blight and potatoes is an example of something that will
Yeah.
stay in the soil.
That's a good example, Betsy.
Oh boy, you're getting all sorts of questions now. What about removing some soil and composting it and then replacing it in spring? Would that help with rotation?
Well, so when you say composting, for composting to really reduce, especially diseases, it really has to be managed very hot, and that's very difficult to do in a non-commercial situation. It has to get, I can't think of the temperature it needs to get to, but it needs to get quite hot.
120 or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
160, says Jenny.
Oh, there you go, Jenny. Thanks.
And
so
we will
yeah,
have a talk on composting later. And also one of the questions is on what flowers to put in to attract beneficials. And we'll have another talk on that, I think tomorrow. So, and then regarding tomatoes, if you use plastic soil covering, can you plant in the same spot? So basically, if you're keeping the debris out of the soil that way.
Well, that would, yeah, you would have less debris going into the soil.
Yeah, so that.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think plastic mulch is a way to avoid rotating, I guess, but it might make it a little bit better.
What about using white household vinegar for cleaning? I would imagine stakes and maybe the landscape fabric, since it kills mold.
Yeah, I don't think that would be sufficient, because it's actually bacteria that we're going after. So yeah, so low pH does inhibit fungi, but it doesn't necessarily kill bacteria.
And sometimes don't you have to use really stronger than normal vinegar solutions to get much effect?
You know, I can't speak.
So it's probably not a great.
Yeah, I guess not. No.
And so I'm just keeping an eye on things so that we can keep doing questions if Joellen wants to put her presentation up, just because sometimes it takes a bit.
And so yeah, I'm looking at the polling results, and thanks everyone for replying. And it looks like there's been some change in people who think that IPM and organic are very similar. So I feel like my job here is done. Yes. Thank you.
How about what do you do with mulch after the year is up?
Plastic mulch?
No, it doesn't say, it just says mulch.
Well, so mulch can be a good addition of organic matter to the soil. So yeah, so get rid of your any kind of diseased plant parts as much as you can, and then till it into the soil and try to get those things to decompose.
Yeah, so it's wood chip mulch, you responded.
Oh, wood chip mulch. Yeah, so some people think that putting wood chip mulch into the soil is a good practice, that, you know, it'll certainly decompose in the soil, but you have to keep in mind that there might be some diseased plant parts that go in with it.
And I'm going to do one more question, but also if we have questions that don't get answered, we will get the answers from the speakers and then send those out because we have everyone's email. So this one is, how deep in the soil do pests overwinter? If planting in containers or raised beds can remove the top 6 to 8 inches and replace it with new soil?
Boy, gardeners are very inventive.
They are. They're very smart.
These are really great ideas I'm hearing. So I haven't actually thought about that. I think they overwinter, like insects probably overwinter in like probably the top 2 or 3 inches of soil. But diseases will overwinter as far in as you probably till them in. So I guess removing soil and replacing it would probably help, but it seems that sounds expensive and time consuming and a lot of work. So I don't know.
Thank
That's
you,
my
Abby.
response. Sorry.
Thank you, Abby, for answering all the questions and the talk. Also,